Hi everybody! Today I have decided to do a video on seven different things that you can do with an old book. And I know that there are more than 7 things, and I'm sure you have heard of these, but I thought I would share the 7 things that I do most often with vintage books and antique books and old books and all sorts of books. This isn't necessarily the things you can do with pages from the books, but things you can do with the books and the book covers. So let's get started. The first thing I'm going to show you is something you're probably familiar with. It's a junk journal, and you can make a junk journal with any kind of book. This was an old Trixie Belden, which I used to make a summer themed junk journal. So I made some charms that were summery, ice cream, a boat, and some shells. And I guess that the beauty of using a book cover to create a junk journal cover is, more often than not, it's already cardboard. Now this one had happy birthday for Laurie Ann and the date, the 3rd of the 5th, or the 5th of the 3rd, 75, and I loved that, so I kept that in there. And I chose this fabric because it was kind of summery and it matched the colors. And I used a vintage label maker to stamp summer junk journal. And then all different papers inside and different mixed ephemera. I have got a separate flip through for this journal that I'm going to be posting very shortly. So I'm not going to go into too much depth looking at this, but it is something that you can do very quickly and very easily with a book cover. Now, how I usually do it is I use the front and the back. If the spine is good or wide enough for what I need, then I'll reinforce it with some cardstock or cardboard, depending on how sturdy I need it to be. And if the spine is too narrow or damaged, as was the case in this book, I use some thicker card, like the back of a notepad, or not a notepad, a water pad, like a watercolor pad, or a palette pad. Often has a nice thick cardstock, and you can buy it not necessarily at Joann's or Michael's, but definitely at an art supply store like Blick's Art Supplies, or in Australia, Eckersley's. Cut it to size, and then you can choose how wide or narrow you want your spine to be. This book has 3 signatures, which is my favorite amount, because then you don't get overwhelmed at feeling like you're never going to finish the book. So that is item number 1. The second thing that you can do is completely different. Now this is a personal work in progress, and I'm just going to move the camera a little bit closer because this is a bit smaller. It is an old, I think it's Dutch maybe, or some kind of Eastern European, possibly German book. And as you can see, the cover is very, oh, it's even been stuck down here. It's very old, and the front was really damaged, and I actually covered it with a coat of gesso, and I used washi tape to reinforce the spine, and I had this little vintage metal frame corner, so I added that. I glued this picture in because I liked it, and then I decided to basically prime every page in a different way. I have a mixture of tools that I was using within this book, and then it has become my drawing sketchbook. So I was doing some Jane Davenport style faces, and see, the pages are so weak that they have started to pull out a little bit. I like this one. The dots from the page ended up looking a bit like beauty marks. Every page has been treated differently. So this was acrylic ink sprayed onto tissue that I put down. This was my favorite page. I might just leave it blank. It's decoupaged from a napkin, and it's a beautiful napkin. There's white gesso. This is book pages from another book that I've collaged on there. Celery stamping, acrylic spraying, all different. I had an ink catastrophe, I guess one might say, in which I was trialing some ink spots and the gesso didn't catch it. This ink is really strong. It is Stamp Pad pigment ink. I can actually show you. It's this ink, and I was experimenting with it and it went a bit crazy, but that's fine. This was a wrapper from a beauty shop and all different things. Wax paper. It's a bit of a hodgepodge and I didn't quite finish it, but I guess you could call it an altered book. And so that's definitely one option. It's a really good option if you want to test your materials, which was my main purpose. I had a few new pens and textures and markers that I wanted to trial. So that's item number 2. Item number 3 is completely different. It isn't a arty thing. Well, it is, but it's more of a storage thing. So I used the pages from this. Was a Spanish book about the ocean, like Spanish language for children. And I just loved the color. I just couldn't resist this color, and the cover with the fish, I didn't want to waste it. So I made a storage folder with some waxed paper to store die cuts. So they all sit in there and I can see them and I can access them as I like. And you could make as many pockets as you liked. You could make a lot of narrow ones for stamps, or you could just do 2 big ones, like wide pockets for paper clippings. And you could store anything in there. It's perfect for me for my die cuts. I reinforced the spine with some fabric washi, and I used fabric washi because it is so sturdy and it just doesn't peel up, whereas I find the paper washi often you need to use double-sided tape or glue. So that's the 3rd idea. The 4th idea is different again. This is a Roget's International Thesaurus, and I bought this at the Goodwill outlet, and it didn't actually have its innards. It was just the cover, but the cover was in perfect state. As you can see here, it's got a lot of signatures. It's got 10 signatures, and it is DuPont watercolor paper. So I stitched in 4 pages in every signature, so it's got 40 pages in total. On the inside cover, it was all a bit torn up, and I had this old photography magazine. So I glued and have sealed in an inside cover of some advertisements, which are actually available in the mixed paper pack. So if you go onto my Etsy, the Ink and Ivory Paper Co. on Etsy, you'll be able to get a mixed paper pack that has 3 pages of these vintage photography magazine pages, I guess. I just love them. So they were perfect. I used some vintage fabric to reinforce the spine. I didn't use cardboard to reinforce this spine. It didn't need it. It still had its card in it. But I did need to use some fabric just to make sure that it wouldn't tear and it could withstand it. The beauty of not adding extra thick cardboard in the spine means that I can lie it relatively flat, which is something that is often not possible when you're working with a saddle stitch in the spine. It's why people often do Coptic stitch, so they can lie their books flat. So that's between the signatures, and then that's like a split page, and then in the center of the signature. So it makes it a very nice workable book. And I get to use my favorite watercolor paper, and I always feel much more creative when it's in a cool case. So that is option number 4. 4 of 6. 4 of 7, I mean. Option number 5 is an old Campbell's Cooking with Soup cookbook. And I picked this up at an estate sale, and I picked it up because it had the most darling little illustrations. Happy boy. And I thought it would be fun to use, and it had some of the great retro food photography, which I find often less than appetizing, but I didn't really know what to do with it. And the spiral spine is great, but I can't add more pages. So what I decided to do was use it to become a sticker book. So I have used a little bit of glue stick to stick my different stickers inside. And then you can see on a couple of pages, this one here, as I use it, I just pull it out and I can use the page again. Now, there are so many pages in this book because it's such thin paper that if I wanted to use one as a page in a junk journal, like this cute little girl, I could just tear it out. I haven't done that yet just because I haven't been doing any junk journals that would take a page like this, but it is definitely an option, and I can just keep reusing these pages as the stickers get used up. I find it's a really nice way to see your stickers when they're flat like this, and it let me see that I actually have less stickers than I thought I did. I just have a lot of the same. So that is another option. That's option number 5. And then option number 6 is similar to the other altered book. This is another kind of altered book. This is a golden book of gardening, which I used in my I would say August-September junk journal. Most of the pages were from this book, and this book just had the most beautiful photos and illustrations, and I love it to bits. So I have gessoed a lot of pages and then started doing different kinds of painting and art and experimentation in the different pages. That was a China marker on, that's just black acrylic with a touch of the clear gesso in, just to give it a bit more of a thing. But I loved how much the fluorescent yellow China marker really popped up. So all the pages are different. Some of them have been stuck together, which gives it a thicker card kind of feeling, and some of them are just as is. And I haven't really done a lot in this book. As you can see, it's basically empty, but I have gessoed most of the pages to prime them, ready to go as soon as I'm inspired. I really thought this would be a great spring book, and now that we're in fall, I am holding on until next spring before I get really inspired by the natural environment. The last book I want to show you is kind of a trick book. As you can see, I haven't bound into it, but I did tie binding, which there are heaps of tutorials online, and it's kind of logic based. You find the center point, you tie it good and tight. I do my knots at the bottom. I wrap twice. I do 2 rounds of wrapping, and then I do about 4 knots at the bottom. And I left it a long tail because eventually I'll get around to making some charms. This is the book, the junk journal I was just talking about. And this book, you can see it's a bit collapsy because I reinforced the spine, but I left this soft, is what I would call a traveler's notebook compendium. So I could fit maybe 1 other thick one or 2 thin ones in here. And they allows me to see all my junk journals once they're finished and have them filed away, because while I'm using them, I have them in a cover so I can take it around and about. But then once it's completed, I want to be able to refer back to it and look at it, and the only way to really do that is if I have it stored somewhere nice. And what a better way to store it than inside a nice book cover. So that is basically what this is for. And I thought it was funny that it was called Lives of the Saints. And again, this is another one that I picked up at the outlet that had been torn limb from limb. But there's a beautiful picture of a stained glass window. St. Peter there and St. Paul there, looking after my traveler's notebooks. So that's it. 7 different ideas for things that you can do with books. Old books, oldish, super old, and maybe not so old. It's amazing what you can do when you play around with what you've got. I can't wait to hear what else you do with old books. Make sure you let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, guys.